actually a chiropractic talk per se. It's more on like universal laws that we will use in adjunct to chiropractic, but not just chiropractic, not just like achieving health and physical goals, but mental goals and spiritual goals and emotional goals, other goals as well. Okay, because if you're aware, and I guess this is kind of the intro to this kind of thing, you can go in so many different directions and in great depth and detail to, talking about how quantum physics applies to, health, for example, or mental health, and how all these fields that are around us affect us mentally and emotionally and things like that. So there's a lot of different directions that we could go and depth that we could go into, and we will. But this is like the baseline intro to this kind of thing and this way of thinking. Come on in, guys. So with that, yeah, again, it's interactive. So if you guys have questions or comments, just stop me and ask. But we're gonna go over the basics, and then I'm gonna kind of, as we go, show you guys how to apply this stuff and how to actually use it. I want it to be information, like, wow, this is great information, but I want it to be applicable, something that you can actually use in day-to-day life as well, okay? So we always want to talk definitions. So, how everybody says, you create your own reality. Well, where there's reality, which is the state of things as they appear to be, but then there's actuality, which is the state of things as they actually are, okay? So another definition that we have to look at is context, which is that which gives meaning or purpose, and then content, which is that which is expressed. So we're going to be talking definitions so that we can kind of get deeper into some of the beginning stuff. So when we're talking context versus content and reality versus actuality, we start from the beginning. In the beginning, the earth was without form, void, darkness was upon the face of the deep, blah, blah, blah. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And so in the beginning, there was nothing. We have to ask, you can't probably see that. What is a void? Okay. Nothing means void of all content. All right. Not context, because context has no content, right? So I am, when God says I am, it's a state of eternal context. All right? So when God said, let there be light, boom, that's content. All right? God, like, unmanifest would be the eternal context, but that which gives meaning to everything. But as soon as that first particle, if you think of light as a particle, we're going to talk about fields, but light, we know, has three different states. We talked about this maybe in the last presentation and the time before. We can see it as a particle, we can see it as its wave function, or we can see it as a field. Now, as soon as that first particle is created, now we have a context for measurement around. We have 3 dimensions. Before that, there were no dimensions, right? But now we've created this field of dimensions, and we have movement past that particle, which means we have time, okay? Motion past it, we can measure in time. So basically, all of space and time comes into existence at the same time, but everything, when we boil it down to its smallest parts, is energy. It's that light, okay? So all of creation is actually composed of these vibrational energy matter, which we reduce it down to subcomponents, and it's made up of frequency-specific light, okay? All the matter in the universe, if you take this stuff and you break it down into its subatomic parts, you get to that last particle where you divide it and it's not matter anymore. It's actually now energy. And it's just light vibrating at different frequencies. So it's like an artist might create art in clays or watercolor or, paint in oils or something like that, but God creates in light. That's his art medium, okay? So all of creation is actually that frequency-specific light. When we talk about, come on in, wave particles or string theory, you've heard of string theory. It's basically just those particles, or waves vibrating at certain frequencies, okay? So, fields then. What's a field? We can talk about light in its field form, and you guys, it's really tough to understand this, but like we talked about, the internet, for example, is a field. Where is the internet? Well, it's all around us, because you can take your phone anywhere in here and you can access that field. We all understand, all of us born in the 70s or before, understand those electromagnetic fields. Like the magnetic field there, you can see its shape by those iron filings. We all did this in grade school. You guys have probably never seen this. But in grade school, they taught us about fields using that magnet and those filings there to show us that it has a shape, it has an existence three-dimensionally. We just can't see it, but it's there, okay? And you take another magnet and you can access that. You take something else, you know, wire, and wrap it around there, it becomes an electric field. So you can convert those fields and move things through them. A field basically is a mathematical representation for the binding or bindedness of certain particles, okay? So how they affect one another from certain distances. That's mathematically, that's what a field would be. And there's a field that surrounds all matter, like when you break it down, even the smallest particle of matter, there's a field that surrounds that, and that field is what actually gives that matter its property, okay? So if you take an atom of gold, for example, there's a field that surrounds that, and the specifics of that field is what gives that gold its properties, all right? And the same thing when you get up to bigger matter. There are different types of fields that we're going to talk about, but they're all underlied by that universal field, okay, that kind of connects everything at great distances. And what we found out through quantum physics experiments is that you can take two particles, and they call it like intertwining them, entangling them, I guess is the right word. You can get them both spinning at the same time, and then you can move them, you know, across the universe technically, but you affect this one particle and get it to spin the other direction. Simultaneously, that other particle starts spinning, okay? So that, if you know anything about Einstein's theory of relativity, that kind of violates what we thought about nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, because technically you could have this 1,000 light years away and instantaneously they change, but that's the property of a field. It allows that energy and information transfer instantaneously across great distances, okay? And that's wow information, but I'm going to show you how we use that information, okay? So those fields surround everything and give it its properties and maintain it in existence as it is, okay? So how many of you guys have heard about these water experiments by Dr. Emoto? Kinda, sorta? Yeah. So he took those emotion words like love and anger and hate and joy and all these, and then he put in things like heavy metal and, you know, different languages and different songs, and he found that those energy fields affect water. Okay, they actually affect everything, but they affect water in such a way that when you freeze water and it crystallizes, it'll affect the pattern of the crystals. So I thought that was neat, because our bodies are like 80% water, right? So how are those fields affecting our physical body? That's what I started thinking when I was reading this. But Dr. Emoto, he froze that water and looked at the crystal structure under a microscope, and what we would see is like grace and love and peace and joy. Those concepts, not just the word, but the energy of that concept is contained in that form, and it's measurable. The frequency is measurable, and it's a clean frequency versus a dirty frequency with like hate and agony and depression and things like that. They have a different form, a different frequency that's emitted, and it affects that crystal structure of water, okay? So that's something that was applicable. we know that our body, being water, is going to be affected by those fields that represent like high energy or higher consciousness emotions, let's say. So how many of you guys have heard of power versus force? No? Okay. So all of those emotions over here, the levels of consciousness and the emotions and your life view, they've actually been able to measure that frequency and then calibrate that frequency to make this chart basically that takes us from the highest levels of like enlightenment or infallibility, you know, peace, joy, love, reason, acceptance, willingness, neutrality, courage, pride, all the way down to guilt, shame, grief, those levels of consciousness or emotions, okay? So again, how do we use that? Because those states of being have a vibrational frequency. It's a field. It represents a field that we're kind of tapping into with our mind, which is a field. Okay, our mind can link up with those fields and be affected by them. So how do I use this? Well, my brother-in-law became an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he became suicidal at one point, and he was sent to rehab. And when I went to visit him in rehab, he was suicidal, and I walked into that place, and immediately, like, I could feel that field in that place. Okay, it started making me physically ill. And when I talked to him, I would say he was at this state, you know, in deep depression, where his life view was that life was hopeless. Okay, so he's way down here on the level of consciousness in his mind. That's the field that he is operating in. And he was physically ill, but he was mentally ill, and he was really hurting. And I thought the only way that we can get him out of this is we have to move up the list here. We have to move him to a higher level of consciousness. When he's at that state, moving up isn't tough, okay? What I had to do was I had to get him angry about the situation that he was in, angry at someone, maybe, who had contributed to him being in this situation. And it was his pride, that pride that allowed him to be angry in that situation. Now, is anger a good thing? No, not if you're, you know, up here above that middle black line represents the frequency of vibration that's actually helpful to life versus hurtful to life below that line, okay? So I had to get him up here to courage to be able to take the initiative to do something for himself. So I got him angry, talking about how, you know, he was wronged and how his pride was hurt, and what that allowed him to do, getting angry, was to get off his butt and actually do something. And that took courage, okay? And eventually he crawled out of that, and he got himself a job, and he got himself cleaned up. And he said, you know, that talk that you gave me there in that place, he said, that's what changed everything for me, and that's what saved my life. And I laid this chart out for him, and I said, you know, I just explained it like I just explained to you guys. I think you're here right now. We got to get you to here. And here's the only way I know how to do that. Okay, so that's something that's applicable to our life. Okay, so we talk about those fields, and again, that unified field, or M theory, states that the universal field, that one that underlies all the other and connects all the other fields, it's connecting and allowing instantaneous interactions over great distances without any time loss, right? So studies have shown repeatedly that the fields of human thought or prayer, okay, or intention interact with those fields and affect fields of someone else's body, okay, at long distances. So if we are sitting here thinking about someone 100 miles away, those fields are connected. And we can actually affect them with our thoughts and our prayers and our good intentions as well, okay? So M field stands for morphogenic field, and it's a field that there's hundreds, maybe thousands of different types of fields. But this M field, I think, is cool because you can store nearly infinite amounts of information within that field, and you can transmit information over a beam of light, nearly infinite amounts of information over a beam of light as well, okay? That's the different light functions. But within that field, an M field is that field that, like an animal that is a certain shape, like a spider, okay? Morphology means shape, right? So the body of that spider that's born has already been connected to that M field just by way of its morphology. And the baby spiders never know their mother. She's long gone before they hatch, all right? But they come out knowing exactly how to weave that perfect web. And crazy enough, each species of spider has its own web pattern, okay? So how do they know that? Again, the mind of a spider, if there is such thing, it's a field, and it's just jacked into that morphogenic field. When they're born, that information on how to spin that web is contained within that field, and they're jacked into that field because of that morphology, right? That shape. So information stored in a field can be accessed by aligning with that field or tuning into that same frequency. They're tuned into that frequency because of their shape, right? That's an M field. It's a very low level field. But how does it affect us? So M fields are also known as attractor patterns, and they can be used to program or modify behavior. A lot of times we observe this in animals, but it's like animals don't really live their life consciously, right? So if you don't live your life consciously, you just default to the predominant field. And the reason I got the monkeys here, this is actually from a Japanese study, and it's now referred to, you guys can look this up, as the 100th monkey study. Anybody heard of the 100th monkey? Okay, this phenomenon where these Japanese scientists, they're on this island where there's, in the center of the island, a mountain range that effectively separates two populations of these monkeys, okay? And for as long as they've ever been on this island, these Japanese scientists have observed these monkeys every day picking these tubers or these roots and eating them down by the river, okay? And every day they go down there to feed. One day, there's two stations, one on each side of the island, observing these two different populations of monkeys separated by the mountain range. One day, on this side of the island, a monkey goes down, picks that tuber full of dirt, and goes down and actually washes it off. First time that they've ever seen this behavior. He's washing that root, getting all the dirt off of it, and then eating it, okay? On day two, again, same side of the island, another monkey goes down. Two monkeys did this, and then another, and then another. When it hit 10% of the population on this side of the island, 100%, both sides of the island, started washing that root before they would eat it. When that 100th monkey started doing it, it affected the entire population. That was a field, okay? That field transfers that information across distance through form, morphology. Those monkeys were automatically jacked into that M field that was the monkey field, and without thought, okay, without being conscious, they just default to that field, all right? And how does that apply to us? Well, I just use this example. Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, okay? Live life consciously. If you're conscious, even just conscious that these fields exist and they're around you and they're affecting you, that consciousness alone is going to change things for you, okay? When I look back at this study, okay, there's something called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which basically says that the observer, you know how I said there's three states of light, the wave, the particle, and the field. Just by the fact that we observe that particle, we change its state, okay? So by the fact that these Japanese scientists were observing this study, these monkeys, they changed the behavior of that monkey, okay? My guess is they're sitting there watching them crunching on the dirty tubers thinking, oh, Think of the dirt in your teeth. Think of that, you know, and thinking, like putting it out into this field that you should wash that, you know. Just their simple intention on that monkey, like, that's disgusting, you should wash that, change the behavior of the monkey, okay? And then that one monkey goes down and washes it, and then again and again, until boom, all the monkeys are doing that. Never seen it before, right? So if we don't live life consciously and being conscious that these things are out there and they're surrounding us and they're affecting us, we default to the predominant field. So the mind, along with all your thoughts and ideas, it's composed of those vibrational electromagnetic fields and wave particles, okay? So there are a couple different particles that I want to introduce you to. These are subatomic particles. These are even smaller than like the electrons, for example. These are particles that actually make up electrons and neutrons and positrons and things like that. Quantum particles, if they exist as a particle, which they don't, they're fields, right? They're energy. Bosons and fermions. And the firm ions, I highlighted like that because this is when we think of like hard matter being in a state, this is the particle that we think of, okay? A boson is more energy. It's not firm, like a fermion, okay, a firm ion. So in a boson state of mind, let me see here, there we go. Bosons include carrier particles such as photons, gluons, and gravitons. So photons, we know, carry the electromagnetic field. Gravitons carry what field? Gravity, gravitational field, okay? And the boson in equilibrium, in its equal state, it has no mass, it has no charge, all right? It's associated, though, in terms of our mind, with a state of unconditional love in which you only see equilibrium. Doesn't see positive or negative. It doesn't see charge, okay? Which would equal, the charge would equal a state of emotion. Like if I charge something as positive, I have an emotion or emotional reaction towards that. Does that make sense? Okay, so a person in this state, we say the will of God is equilibrium. That was a quote from St. Augustine. He said, the will of God is equilibrium. When we balance all the charges in the universe, it's a net zero, okay? All the positives equal out to the negatives, all right? So bosons, something crazy about them, because they don't have mass or charge, numerous bosons can actually occupy the same space and time, all right? So if our mind is in this state, we can look at every one of our kids, how I would use this information. We can look at every one of our kids and say, you're my favorite kid, okay? Why? Because information about that kid is stored within that field. It occupies this space in my mind reserved for my favorite, okay? But because those bosons can occupy the same space in the same time, I can say to Gemma, you're my favorite, because you occupy that space of my favorite in my mind. But at the same time, I can say to Lucy, you're my favorite, because I love them unconditionally, okay? They can occupy that same space in my mind. That's the preferred state that we would be in. But that's not reality for most of us most of the time. So those firm ions, it's called fermions, but the firm ions, they're imbalanced particles, okay? They're actually, when you take a boson and you give it charge or you give it spin, you affect it with another field, it breaks into two fermions, a positive and a negative, okay? So now when we make something solid, we've broken that energy state, that boson, into a positive and a negative. So in our mind then, if it's a fermion state of mind, they can't occupy the same space in the same time, okay? So we have favorites. They're associated with uncertainty, instability, and conditionality, like my love for this person has conditions, okay? So that's the state of mind we associate with a fermion field. And again, those fields are out there. They're just affecting our mind. If we're not living consciously, we'll default to this. And especially if there's other people around with that same state of mind, okay, that same field. So fermions are charged, like I said. Positive charge in our mind, that field, would equal somebody who's like self-righteous. I think I'm better than you, okay? Negative would be self-wrongous, if there is such a thing. I'm making up words here, but you know what I mean. Those people who just think I'm garbage, okay? So the positive fermion state there sees this state where positive outweighs the negative, right? Is that reality? No. Is that actuality? I mean, no. In actuality, right, there's equal amount of positive and negative. Like we said, the universe, every interaction, all the energy balances out to net zero. But we can, in this state of mind, see that, okay, there's going to be more positives than negatives in this situation here, okay? Whereas, again, the negative sees more negatives outweighing the positive. Both are conditional states, like I said, and both are emotional exaggerations of what actually is. So when we're in that state of mind, when we're not living consciously to this, we exaggerate what is. We either are in the positive, it's like we're kind of bipolar, okay? We do this, we oscillate between highs and lows. Highs, it's like elation or infatuation, whereas the lows are sadness, depression, and resentment, okay? So, again, the will of God is equilibrium. That was St. Augustine, because supersymmetry, this again is another universal law. It's actually a scientific law, and it just states that because there's positives and negatives and they all balance out at all times, it's impossible to have a positive without a negative, and vice versa, okay? That's the law. So perception, though, our perception requires contrast. Contrast. So we can't perceive a positive unless that negative exists. We can't perceive a negative unless that positive exists simultaneously. But we choose, okay, or maybe we don't choose, maybe we just default to that state of mind where we maximize one over the other. We might maximize the positive, or we might maximize the negative. But remember, the will of God is equilibrium, but the lie of the enemy is that there's disequilibrium. So if we go back to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what was the state of mind, if we look at like man before the fall, what was the state of mind before the fall and then after the fall? Well, they knew the will of God. They knew equilibrium, right? That unconditional love, that unconditional state. No positive, no negative. It's just everything's perfect. And they had free will, but the fall took place the moment that they chose to disobey and rationalize, well, there's more positive here to me eating this apple, right, than negative, okay? That was the lie right there that we chose to believe, and that we still choose to believe most days, that there's going to be more positive here than negative, or more negative than positive. So the enemy told it we could be like God, knowing good and evil. Not good from evil, good and evil, knowing positive and negative. Not knowing that boson state of unconditional love, but knowing positive and negative, okay? So we perpetuate that lie a lot of times in our own interactions and relationships. So a lot of this is applicable to our relationships, okay? So each time we lie to ourselves, or we exaggerate positive or negative in a person, let's say, okay, or a relationship, if we exaggerate the positive over the negative, or let's say we exaggerate the negative over the positive, this person's a monster, okay? Every time that I do that, I have to create this new persona in order to perpetuate that lie. So I have to become what? If this person is a monster and they're victimizing me, what am I? The victim, right? So I just created this new persona of me. I'm now a victim, right? So the body will physically manifest the mind's beliefs. It will physically be affected by those fields. And why? Because it's 80% water, right? And those fields, we know, affect the even just the physical structure of those crystals in that water. I said it wasn't a chiropractic, and it's not, okay? But I just found it interesting. Subluxation is a manifestation of that imbalance, okay? It's like your body has memory of this past event, and it recorded it in the nervous system and expresses it through the physical body. Subluxation, remember, sub means less than, sub means less than, right, like a submarine. Sub means less than, lux means divine life or divine light, and ation means to be in a state of, so subluxation, remember, means to be in a state of less than that divine light, less than that boson balanced field. So the light of consciousness, we say present time consciousness, being conscious of what I'm in right now, can be fragmented into duality, and that's what we call like a subluxation of the mind, which is why I called this series Above the Atlas, okay? Because we have to work on our mind if we want to heal our body too, okay? So our mind can get lost in our past or in our future, and that unconditional love then is equilibrium, and that's a balanced mind, that boson state. It can either be balanced or it can be imbalanced by those emotions. So because of the nature of that field, what happens is when we're charged, if you remember doing the experiment in science class where you'll pour positive ions and negative ions on a separate side of a membrane and then give it time, it'll balance out. So there's just net zero charge on both sides. Okay, what happens is oscillation from positive to negative, okay? Again, it's like we're all bipolar. We go from that positive to that negative and back and up and down. So due to supersymmetry, which is the law, an unbalanced mind, an unbalanced field, that's say positive charge over here and negative charge over here, it's going to oscillate between positive and negative, which is elation and depression, okay? Or infatuation, if we're talking about the mind as it applies to this person, infatuation and resentment, or attraction and repulsion, okay? So it's gonna oscillate. That's, again, it's the law, okay? So if you put too much charge on something or someone, it's going to swing. If you're too infatuated with someone, eventually you'll resent that person. That makes sense? Okay, so I love this quote by C.S. Lewis. He said, you try to exclude the possibility of suffering, which the existence of free will in. So, who or what in your mind? You have to ask yourself that. Okay, you don't have to answer it, obviously, but ask yourself who or what occupies space and time in my mind. If you have unconditional love for someone, again, you're not putting a charge on them. Remember that infatuation always leads to resentment due to that supersymmetry, that oscillation. So infatuation, you know, the guy with the tattoo of his girlfriend's name and then cross it out. I hate her guts. I'm going to go to the next one. He's got like 5 or 6 of them. So this is actually representation of those fields, those fermion fields, okay, in space as they connect with one another. So the mind experiences reality then in space-time intervals. So that boson state, remember, that balance state experiences the present. We're in present time consciousness, right? And that's actuality. That's seeing things as it really is. But that fermion state, that positive and negative divided state, it oscillates between past, which usually is guilt and anger, and future, which is usually fear. Like we're perceiving with fear. Fear comes from when you assume that in the future, you or someone you love will experience more pain than pleasure, more negative than positive, okay, from yourself or others. Read it again. Dig it in there, okay? You feel that. You know that's true. We've all experienced that, okay? Guilt, anger, those things arise when you assume that in your past, you or someone else caused more pain than pleasure, okay? More negative than positive. Oh, wait a minute. I screwed that up. Yeah, no, I'm right. But this is in your past. This is in your future, right? And again, if we're assuming that there was more negative than positive, we're kind of kidding ourselves because it has to balance. It's the law, right? So the masters can look at those situations that suck and they can see the positive almost immediately. The rest of us, it's kind of like we have to go through life and finally get to a point where we can look back at those experiences and say, you know what, that sucked at the time, but look at all these things that came from that, okay? And then it balances out in our mind. So the perception that pleasure is greater than pain distorts space and time. It speeds up time in our mind, okay? That's why we say time flies when you're having fun, right? And then the opposite is also true. The perception that pain is going to be greater than pleasure kind of slows down time. So if you want to make the weekend last forever, make yourself just miserable enough. Like, go get some gas station sushi. You know, you're just going to have diarrhea, maybe a little vomiting for a weekend, but you'll remember every second of that weekend, okay? Yeah, don't really do that. So, we desire to change stuff that we don't love, that we don't see that balanced state. Remember, the will of God is equilibrium. You look at these areas of your life and you find imbalances. So how do we use this information now? Okay. Well, I look at my life and maybe look at different areas of my life, and I've kind of got broken down like 7 different areas of my life. But if I'm looking at relationships, okay, that's one area of my life. And if I look at that relationship that I have with, say, mom, dad, whoever, and if I see it as more negative than positive, let's say, then I write down mom, okay? And then I write all the negatives. And then I go over to the other side of the page and I don't stop writing until I have all the positives that equal the negatives. I make myself see it. Like, it's there, those positives are there, but I'm choosing not to see it by saying, no, this relationship with my mom, and I hope my mom isn't watching because she'll think that's, I'm not talking about you, Mom. I'm just using it as an example for people to use in their life that, you know, if you have that kind of relationship with your mom, or let's say it's your dad, whoever, you could easily write down all those negatives because we focus on those things. That's what occupies space and time in our mind. But what we have to realize is the positive has to exist, right? The opposite, because we can't perceive something without that contrast. So I know the positives out there, but I'm choosing not to see it, okay? So I have to make myself see that. That's how I use this stuff, all right? Remember, I am is a state of eternal context. And this used to be hanging on my great-grandma's wall, and I saw it online, and I just thought, man, I'm going to put that in a talk sometime. And I don't think I've ever made it through reading this without bawling, but it just says, my name is I am. I was regretting the past and fearing the future, okay? Regret and fear, past, future. Suddenly, my Lord was speaking. My name is I am. He paused. I waited. He continued. When you live in the past with its mistakes and regrets, it's hard. I'm not there. My name is not I was. When you live in the future with its problems and fears, it's hard. I am not there. My name is I will be. When you live in this moment, it's not hard. I am here. My name is I am. So these are the 7 areas of life. And how I would use this information, if you're going to take this home and apply it somewhere, I would look at, you know, you want to be well balanced. You want to be, you know, work, mental, family, financial, social, physical, spiritual, all those 7 areas of life. You want to be maxing out those areas in terms of your growth and maturing. So let's say physical, okay? I want to get oops, sorry. I want to get fit, pointer, physical. I want to get fit. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to train to run a marathon. I want to gain 10 pounds of muscle, whatever your physical goals are, okay? So chances are we're seeing something there that's holding us back. We're probably seeing limitations, okay? And we're associating with that field, and maybe that comes from someone else who's sitting there watching me, the 100th monkey, right? And saying, you can't do that. That's not possible, okay? Your genetics, it's genetic. You've got generations of Davises or Crystals or whoever who never did this because it's just not in our genes. We can't do it, okay? So that limitation, we have to take that, whoever that person is in our mind, that person holds space and time, okay? And it's affecting that field that we've bought into, it's affecting us physically, right? So we have to write down and do this exercise where we write that down, we write all the negatives, and we don't stop until we balance it out and we write all the positives, okay? And then you find somebody who has done it. Whatever that goal is, you find somebody who's done it, who's defied those odds, okay? Or helped somebody do it, and then you connect with that field, all right? You take on those beliefs, and you balance yourself out that way. And you use that person who maybe you can't believe that at that level yet, but they can, and they can believe for you, okay? That's going to raise your consciousness. That's how we overcome those limiting beliefs, all right? Amy Jo, you're thinking really hard. Yeah. You want to share something? No, I'm okay. Question? No? Okay.
Well, I do have a question about one of the past slides. When you're showing the different levels and all the different numbers.
Yeah.
What did those numbers?
It's actually it's a frequency like measurement. The frequency of vibration. It's like at nanometer on a nanometer scale. Okay, and then there's some math done to it, so it's multiplied by a log base 10. Okay, I know, but that's how I would use this information and apply it to life. I probably went way over. I always try to keep this to like half an hour, and then I get yappy on stuff like this. How'd I do? 40? Okay. And we're done. So we'll usually, like I said, there's so much information here that we can go in more depth at future times if you guys want it. If you say, you know what, here's what I want to go into. Here's a goal that I'm having, troubles achieving. Can we do a talk on this? And how am I going to do this? We'll do it. Okay? Because I love doing things with, I used to be a competitive power lifter. So weight gain and weight loss is kind of my thing. I would go as high as 250 and then cut down to 180. Okay? A 70-pound swing. And I got really good at knowing how to put on weight and knowing how to take off weight. Okay? Diet, nutrition, exercise, those things are just, it's not chiropractic, but it's just like a passion of mine. So that's something that I hold a belief that, okay, I can just do this and I can help people do this. And that's what we do. Like I've got people, again, it's not chiropractic, but you guys know, I've helped people lose over 100 pounds, just, helping them figure out how to, physically alter and align their life. Okay. So we can go into greater detail if you want, but it's not mandatory. So we'll just leave it up to at your next visit or whenever. If you guys want to go into something, go ahead.
So that concept about tapping into finding something good at it, how do you do that? You find somebody else who's good at it? How do you
Usually it's somebody who inspires you. You look at them and you're inspired by what they do. You probably put a charge on that person. So the first thing that you usually have to do when you say, hey, I'm looking to do what you've done. I just appreciate what you've done, and I know how hard it had to be because I'm struggling with it. But if you're willing to help me out, here's what I'd like to achieve, you know. And then you probably have to sit down with that not with that person, but with that person in mind, and actually write out positives and negatives to keep yourself from becoming infatuated with that person, because they're still a person. They put their jeans on one leg at a time, right? So that's what I would do for sure. Like a historical figure, or yeah, definitely. It'd be pretty. You'd have to read a lot of biographies or information on that person to really figure out how did they do this. But it's usually more helpful to find somebody living. Yeah.
Like now with the internet and everything that there's a fair amount of people out there, whether it's professionally, whatever they're doing, what you would like to do, that you can lead from or follow, you're like, okay, I get that problem, and that's what they have.
Yeah, and good old University of YouTube, we have so much access to so much, and that we don't even tap into it most of the time because we're too busy watching cat videos or something, right? So definitely use those resources.
I like your point about how living in the present.
Yeah.
To some degree, you don't work those things out here and there. It's
Yeah. We all deal with it though, right? We all struggle with that. So that's how I like to. I share this information because I feel like people can use that. They can use those tools and just that knowledge that those things exist and being conscious of it. It's like you can use that to improve your life. It's not chiropractic, but it's about improving your life. So thanks again, you guys. I went over. Apologies. Next time I'll talk faster, but